This is Mr. Baker, and welcome to my video on factoring two cubes. I do this a little differently than a lot of textbooks or other teachers do. For instance, there's two formulas we're going to talk about, the sum of cubes and the difference of cubes, but I'm not going to talk about them as separate formulas. We're going to treat them as just one thing because they really are. All you need are the right tips to get there. And these three pictures are kind of going to be our guide. We'll start with this one right here. That's a picture of two ice cubes as a reminder that this is factoring two cubes. Anytime we're factoring two cubes, whether they're being added or subtracted, this works. Now that's in sharp contrast to the difference of squares technique, in which two perfect squares have to have a minus in between them for them to factor. Two cubes will factor anytime, no matter what. So here's two cubes for us. We've got x cubed plus 8. Now those are perfect cubes, and we can verify that by figuring out what it is we can cube to get each one. So what do I cube? What do I multiply by itself 3 times to get x cubed? Well, that's going to be x. X is our building block. We can ask the same question about the number 8. What can I multiply by itself 3 times or cube to get 8? Well, that's 2. 2 times 2 times 2 is what's going to equal 8. And those are our building blocks of our two cubes, but they're also going to be our building blocks for our factors. The next picture that's going to help us on our way is this one. Now that's not just any two birds, those are two parakeets, specifically a small parakeet and a big parakeet. Now, we're not going to have any actual birds. I just think that makes a more interesting picture than parentheses, because we're going to have two parentheses is what two cubes always factors into, a small parentheses and a big parentheses. And I prefer parakeets to parentheses, so sometimes I'll call these the small parakeet and the big parakeet. But they're going to help us get things factored. We've just got to put the right stuff in each set of parentheses. Now, the small parakeet only has 2 things in it. The small parakeet just has our building blocks in it, the first building block and the second building block. So in this case, that small set of parentheses has the x and the 2. Now we'll put a sign in between those eventually, but we're going to hold off on that for a moment. So the small parentheses is easy. If you can find those building blocks, you can fill the small parentheses. Now the big parentheses is a little trickier because there's 3 things in the big parentheses. That's why they're so big. And each thing inside those parentheses is made up of 2 pieces, 2 building blocks. The very first term we're going to have in the big parentheses is made up of 2 of the first building block. So the x building block times itself, or whatever that first building block is, times itself. In this case, that's x times x. X times x is going to give us x squared. We can already see a little bit of where some of this is going to come from, because when we distribute, we're going to have that x times that x squared, and that'll give us that x cubed. Next up, the middle piece also comes from 2 building blocks, but it's the 2 different building blocks. It's the only one that uses both. It's the first times the second block, and that's, in this case, it's x times 2. X times 2 is going to give us 2x. So that's our middle piece. And then our last piece is going to come from, well, again, 2 building blocks, but it's going to be the second 2 times. The second times itself. So 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is, of course, going to give us 4 for that last building block. We can also see that when we distribute, this 2 times that 4 is going to give us our 8. And we need everything else other than the x times x squared and the 2 times 4. Everything else has to cancel out. And we've got to get not only the terms built right, but the signs built right to make that happen. We've got the small parakeet and big parakeet filled in. Now we just need to get those signs. And that's what this last picture is all about. That is 3 bars of soap, because soap is going to be the key to getting our signs right. Specifically, SOAP. Those stand for same, opposite, and always plus. And that's what is going to help us figure out our signs. And when we talk about same and opposite, we're referring to the sign in the original problem, which was a plus sign. So when we say same, that small parentheses are going to have the same sign from the original, which is going to be a plus sign. The opposite is our next sign after that x squared. Well, opposite from a plus is a minus, and the last one is always a plus sign. So same, opposite, always, plus. And that's the keys. You can factor anything with the two perfect cubes in it if you know those three things. You've got to look for those two cubes, figure out those building blocks from it. We've got to know it's going to factor into a small parakeet, big parakeet, and we've got to know how to put those two parentheses together, especially that second one where each of the three pieces is built from two building blocks. And then to get the signs right, we've got to remember SOAP, same, opposite, always, plus. Let's try another one. So let's try a cubed minus 27. That one is indeed going to be 2 cubes again. What can I cube to get a cubed? Well, that's just going to be a. That third power is going to make that one stand out. And we need to know our perfect cubes. It does help out. 27 is 3 cubed. So those are our building blocks for our 2 cubes. They're also our building blocks for our parentheses. What do parentheses look like when we factor 2 cubes? Well, here's a hint. Tweet, tweet. We get a small parakeet and we get a big parakeet. Small parentheses and big parentheses. What goes in the small parentheses? Just our 2 building blocks. It's just going to be a and 3. The big parentheses, a little trickier. First block times itself, so that's a times a. That's going to be a squared. Then our second part is first building block times second building block. That's going to be 3 times a, which is 3a. And the last one is a second building block times itself, which is going to give us 3 times 3, that's 9. What are our signs? Same, opposite, always, plus. Since the problem has a minus, the small parakeet gets a minus, the big parakeet gets a plus, and then the last one is always a plus. And that's our answer. A minus 3 times a squared plus 3a plus 9. Fun fact for you, the big parakeet never factors. We can't factor it. So you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out 2 numbers that multiply to be 9 and add to be 3 or anything like that, because they're not going to be there for you. Let's try one that's a little more challenging. So let's look at this one, 16y to the 4th minus 250y. It doesn't look like it's going to be 2 cubes. I don't see anything that's cubed in here. It kind of looks like it's going to be a difference of squares problem, honestly. 16 is 4 squared, y to the 4th is y squared squared. So it looks like it's going that direction. But the second part here isn't going to play games with that because, yeah, 25 is a perfect square, but 250 isn't a perfect anything. And that plain y isn't going to go anywhere. So this is not any of the patterns we've already talked about. So this one's going to have to be something different. In order to get started on this, we actually have to go way back to the beginning of the stuff we talked about in factoring because it's got a greatest common factor. What goes into both of these terms? Well, 2 goes into both the numbers, and they both have at least a y, so 2y is our greatest common factor. We divide each of those by 2y to see what's left. 16 divided by 2 is going to be 8. Y to the 4th divided by y. We subtract the exponent, so that's 4 minus 1. That's going to be y to the 3rd. And then the negative 250y divided by 2y. That'll be negative 125, and those y's cancel right out. Now what we've got left in the brackets, that's a perfect cube. 8y cubed. What can we cube to get that? Well, we cube 2 to get 8. We cube y to get y cubed. So our building block is going to be 2y. 2y times 2y times 2y. That would give us 8y cubed. The 125 is just 5 cubed. And once we recognize that, we should be able to use those to build our two parentheses. That's our small parakeet and our big parakeet. The small parentheses, building blocks just go straight into it. So that's 2y and 5. The big parentheses, 3 pieces. The first one, first block times the first block, so 2y times 2y. Be careful on this one. I get a lot of students making mistakes on that. 2y times 2y is 4y squared. The middle piece is going to be the first block times the second block. So that is 2y times 5. That's going to give us 10y. And then the last piece, second block times itself, 5 times 5 is going to be 25. And now we just have to get those signs in place. That's where our SOAP comes in. Same, opposite, always plus. The original problem, at least the part in brackets, always be careful about that. You don't want to go all the way up to the top. That sign might have changed when we pull out a GCF. So look at this one right here in the brackets. But it didn't change. It's still a minus. So that's going to be same as minus, opposite is plus, and then always a plus for the last one. But there's something missing from this answer. Because we pulled out a greatest common factor, we got to make sure it finds its way into our final answer as well. So bring that 2y down here, and now we can say that's our final answer. It's a lot of pieces there. We got the 2y minus 5, and that 4y squared plus 10y plus 25. Now that's all there is to factoring 2 cubes. You just have to recognize it when you see them, and that's the biggest thing, especially if it's hidden like this one, where we didn't see any cubes at all. But after we got that greatest common factor out, we could see it. But once you recognize it and find those building blocks, just need to remember what it looks like. Small parakeet, big parakeet, and then the SOAP to figure out the signs. I hope you find this helpful. I didn't have parakeets and SOAP to help me learn it when I was learning it. I hope you find that all of these problems come across easy now that you've got those in place. And happy factoring.